Monitor layout modes is a feature in the DCS monitor setup interface. Here we are again in the profile editor, and like I mentioned in a previous video for DCS monitor setup, the UI of the top section where you configure your screens has been changed since the first video was recorded. I was originally going to make a new version of that video with the changes, but it turns out this is actually a pretty complicated addition, and so it warrants its own video. So this video will just talk about the changes in that top section. So here we see the new UI, and I have added some another monitor to my development computer to demonstrate this feature more clearly. So here we see a similar view as before. We have one giant desktop. We have a monitor over here on the left of the main display. This is the main display in Windows. There's another monitor below it and a monitor to the right. At the moment it's configured, just for recap, to render the 3D view that you see, the 3D view in DCS on the main monitor. Same with the DCS user interface and the menus. And there are some viewports here on the right side from the currently loaded profile, which is the A10. Now, in DCS, there is no configuration to tell it where to place the main window that it opens when you run in windowed mode. The only thing you configure is the size of that window by setting the resolution parameter. And DCS then tries to do something clever depending on what that size is and what monitors you have and how they are arranged. That means that you have to tell Helios how DCS is going to interpret the resolution so that in Helios we can generate the correct coordinates for everything and put the viewports in the right place. For this purpose, there is this new configuration option, which is this layout mode. So like it says here, the setting is stored across all profiles. So this is a Helios setting. This is not part of the profile. It just means that on this computer, this is how I lay out my DCS views. Let's go through them. So the first and most basic mode is called from top left corner of desktop. And what that means is that the resolution rectangle that's shown here in green is measured from whatever is the most to the top left on your desktop. That means that even if I don't put anything on this monitor, this corner, the top left here, will still be included. I can remove things from the bottom, and you'll see how it will do that. But I can't remove things from the left or from the top, because if we give DCS a rectangle of this size, this is where it will place it. So not a great result. You can see here Helios is calling out all of this dead area that's going to be actually rendered as black by DCS. This monitor here would also be rendered as black by DCS. So if I was going to use this kind of setup where I have an extra monitor on the left and I have my viewports on the right and the main screen in the middle, I would choose a different mode for that, and the mode we would use for that is the third one, which is horizontal row including primary display. Now I mentioned this screen in the middle is the primary or main display. Different Windows versions call it different things, but this is the monitor that you've selected as your primary one in the Windows options. So by selecting the row mode, I've told Helios that I'm only going to even consider monitors that go straight across on the and that intersecting the height of the main display. You'll see the rectangle here does not include all of the left monitor, because in this mode we're only mapping things that are in a horizontal line with the main display. And if we give DCS this rectangle, size, it will actually place it like this. And that's what this mode means, is what do we expect DCS to do? And then based on that setting, the Helios UI will make sure that you only configure things that are actually going to work. All right, so in this case now what I can do is I can take out this left display in the sense that it doesn't have to render anything, but I can't remove it entirely because in the row mode, the left edge of the desktop is always where DCS will place its window. We can't get it to render these two screens, but not this one on the left. And that's reflected here by the fact that I can't actually unclick this. I don't have to put anything there, but DCS is still going to render it. So in this case, that would just be black in this region here. And this little sliver up here and this little sliver down there would actually be usable desktop space where you could put something else. It's still not an ideal result if what you really wanted was to have that extra screen. Now, if you're one of the more typical users that has one screen for DCS and has one screen below it for Helios, that's why I put this one here for this example, you can use the vertical column configuration. And what that means is you would, it will include everything from the top edge of the desktop, including the main display and anything above and below it. At this point now, it won't render anything on the left screen here, my extra screen. I mean, you can use that for Discord or whatever you want to use it for. Now notice that what I've set up here, I have every possible combination, obviously for demo purposes. But what I can't do is I can't say I want a row and I also want this screen under here. So if you have a T setup where you have 3 screens across the top, because you have a super fancy setup, and one screen below, the only way to make that work in DCS is to use the from top left corner of desktop and then include everything. And that obviously means you're going to be rendering this very large rectangle, which can lead to performance problems. But that's the reality of it. So if you have the T setup and you want to get your rectangle size down, your resolution size down for better performance, then just move this extra screen at the bottom in Windows, tell it that it's actually over here on the right, and then you can use a row layout and everything will just be a much smaller area that you have to render. But okay, so to recap, we have the render everything mode, which starts from the top left. We have vertical column that can be used for stacked layouts, and then you can have extra screens to the sides. We have horizontal row, which means you can have extra screens above and below, and it just, and you can remove things from the right. Actually, right now I can't because I put viewports here, so it won't let me remove it. But I could remove it if there were no viewports on it. You cannot remove from the left. And finally, the last mode is you can always just choose the primary display. In this case, it makes very little sense because I actually have viewports over here, so it's going to give me a warning that it can't render them. See over here, all these warnings. It says it's not contained in the resolution, so none of these are going to work. But I wanted to point out the fact that DCS will, if you choose a resolution that is the size of your main window screen, it will always put its window exactly on that main display, regardless of what other monitors you have. It's not going to be useful in very many cases. It would only really be applicable if your viewports were on your main display, sort of like overlays. But the reality is DCS supports it, so we put it here. It probably is not useful in most cases. So that's that. Then I mentioned, I think before, this setting is across all of your profiles, and so basically the green resolution rectangle, which screens you use for airplanes and helicopters, which screens you use for UI, and which monitors are included. That's all shared across profiles, and that allows you to end up with one big monitor setup file like we demonstrated in the combined monitor setup video.